Welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode number 216. This is the podcast that explores the world of think tanks across the country and also talks about the news of the week as it applies to what we do here and what we're passionate about at the Heartland Institute. I'm Jim Lakely. I'm the Director of Communications at the Heartland Institute. And I'm usually the guest of our usual host, Donald Kendall, but he's out this week. And so is Justin Haskins, as a matter of fact. They're together hanging out with Glenn Beck down in Texas. And so I look forward to hearing how that goes. And Isaac Orr, our other usual guest and participant in the In the Tank podcast, is also otherwise indisposed. So it's just me. And I'll be interviewing a very interesting guest here for about a 30-minute interval of time. And then the second half of the podcast will be my interview at the State Policy Network annual meeting in Colorado Springs last week with Jason Isaac of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He's the head of their project that they call Life Powered. And its purpose is to explain why the world needs continued access to abundant and affordable energy, meaning fossil fuels, and why that is so important to human prosperity. And that, we can continue to use fossil fuels for many, many decades and still protect the environment. I did that live on location at SPN in Colorado Springs, and so I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was a very good conversation on a very important topic. And before I introduce our first guest for this podcast, I do have a favor to ask of you, our listeners. If you are listening to this on iTunes or on your Apple device or on Google Play, or on your Android device, or any of the other platforms this podcast can be found, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Player FM, please take the time to give us a 5-star review and maybe even write up some positive comments with that review. This is the best way that we can grow this podcast, and it's really important. So if you're listening to this or even watching it now on YouTube, please share that video with your friends and on social media. Put it on Facebook, tweet it out, mention it on Instagram. Oh, yeah, and by the way, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. That's the meme of the week. Our guest today is a man I've known for quite a long time, one of my best friends in the world. He is Ben Boychuk. He's the managing editor of the conservative site American Greatness and is a senior fellow or something or other, some kind of title you might have, at the Center for American Greatness, which is like the Heartland Institute, a nonprofit organization that advances liberty. In this case, specifically, American greatness. Ben Boychuk and I, we met. Well, first of all, he's a former Heartlander himself. I think we still have you listed as a policy advisor on our website.
Correct.
I'll get that fixed. We'll get that off of there. But you're also the former managing editor of our publication, Score Reform News. And you and I met, I don't know, gosh, it's more than a decade now
Over
ago.
10 years
Over 10
now,
years now, yeah. When we were both writing as editorial writers for a newspaper in Southern California.
Correct.
And, and now we're here to talk about. So you're actually in town. You're here in Chicago for a fundraiser for the Center for American Greatness. So Ben Boychuk, welcome to the In the Tank podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jim. And I have to say, I love the sophisticated setup. It's a great pleasure to be in the Heartland Institute's really impressive headquarters in Arlington Heights, and I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you here, and hopefully you can make more trips out to Chicago.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Center for American Greatness and its site, American Greatness? It's a journal of opinion, conservative opinion online. Why was the Center for American Greatness and the site American Greatness started? What is the mission? What hole in the market do you think the work that you were doing fills?
That's a big question. Multiple questions, lots to unpack there. We started American Greatness in 2016, ahead of the election, when the Trump phenomenon, when it was clear that Donald Trump's candidacy was beyond a long shot. It was, I think, really at that point, he was the nominee. The site really emerged out of something else. It was kind of a strange confluence of events for the three co-founders. There was myself, Chris Buskirk, who's our publisher, and Julie Ponzi, who's my fellow senior editor. We started it as a kind of way to sort of discuss the Trump candidacy with an intellectual, in a more intellectual way. But we also, there were aspects of the campaign that we felt needed to be highlighted more than they were, needed to be taken seriously. And so when we ended up launching the site in July of 2016 after a couple of months of buildup and circulating a business plan and all that good stuff. We published something. We published sort of an editorial statement called "Our Declaration of Independence from the Conservative Movement," which was really meant to be a kind of a provocation. The idea being, to really get to your question about what hole we're trying to fill. We felt that there was a lot of complacency within the conservative movement and in certain legacy conservative publications. National Review comes immediately to mind. The late and, in my considered opinion, unlamented Weekly Standard also comes to mind. And so we thought we had a role to play there, that there was an agenda that we could articulate. There was what we called it the Greatness Agenda, which involved immigration reform, border enforcement, better trade deals. We're probably a bit more skeptical of free trade than a lot of folks on the right, and certainly within libertarian circles. So I know we probably have some disagreements on that. But also in terms of foreign policy, we were very much against, stupid foreign adventures. And so those were areas that we really wanted to talk about, regardless of whether Trump won or lost. If Trump had lost, we would have kept going. We believe that there was still a lot to discuss there. And so, we started off rather modestly in July of 2016, and we've been growing like gangbusters. And it's I'm personally having the time of my life doing it, but it's been something else.
Yeah, I mean, I see you guys cited. You guys went from 0 to 120 in no time flat. I see you guys cited everywhere.
Right.
Some of my favorite blogs and Insta pundits all over the stuff you guys do. The great Ace of Spades HQ blog is always linking to you guys in their morning report. You have fantastic writers that are regular contributors to American Greatness, and you can get to that at amgreatness.com.
Right.
Or search, of course, you can just Google American Greatness, and they haven't been taken over the Chinese yet, so you can still get to it as of this recording. But Victor Davis Hanson, who many listeners of this podcast greatly admire for his fantastic writing ability and his clear thinking on really what your website is about, which is American Greatness. He writes about that a lot. Mark Krikorian was just in your publication the other day. A lot of our listeners will recognize his name from National Review. Julie Kelly has been, breaking things and ticking off the right people quite loudly through the pages of American Greatness for some time. So you guys are moving up to number one with a bullet.
You know what's great about Julie Kelly? She started out as she was writing a lot about environment and climate type stuff, which is near and dear to Heartland and Heartland fans.
Yeah, Julie has covered some of our climate conferences
right.
in the past.
And that was always kind of her issue. And she was writing at places like the Federalist and National Review. And the Trump thing, 2016 was a moment of clarity for a lot of people. And it was an opportunity for people to rethink a lot of the things that they had been thinking before, sort of taking a lot for granted. I think we just kind of like going through the motions on certain issues and positions, that these are just the positions we're supposed to hold and we don't really have to think about them. And Julie Kelly is one of these writers who, all of her writing is really good, but she was kind of in a weird position where she was writing sort of policy wonky stuff, but she has just a fiery attitude. I mean, it comes through in her writing. And so she started writing for us, and just the writing that she's done for us has been so electrifying. And she's really kind of come into her own, and it's just been so nice to be able to work with writers like her and Victor, and lots of young writers that nobody have probably heard of, but they will be, that they're hearing from finally through us. I've got this terrific writer in the United Kingdom, this guy Christopher Gage, who I was just editing his weekly column for us this week. It appears every Friday, and it's just been in that sense, it's kind of an honor and a privilege to start a new publication because of the opportunities you get to introduce new voices to the world, and that's really kind of part of our mission too. And we have kind of a mandate. We even have a program called the Mount Vernon Fellows Program that is specifically geared toward finding and cultivating younger, unknown talent. So,
oh, that's great. That's great. So Ben Boychuk is managing editor of American Greatness. I remember you talking to me on the phone, telling me about what you're doing, what American Greatness is going to be about. And you said, "Hey, we're on the Trump train, and we're going to defend it." So, in other words, you guys were MAGA before MAGA was cool. And what I actually really admire, and I think is important about American Greatness, is I think it was Selena Zito who had pegged the mainstream media, or especially conservatives, the so-called conservative media, that they took everything Trump said literally, but they didn't take him seriously. Right. And what I thought immediately set you guys apart was that you took Trump seriously, and you took the ideas that he was espousing and the themes that he was building his campaign around seriously. So you guys know this better than anybody. Why is Trump's message, why was it became so powerful in the summer of 2016, propelled him to the election, and seems to buoy him today with so many? These rallies are out of control. They're enormous. But that's obviously because he has a message that, if you take seriously, has having a big impact on the American people.
Right. And the other half of that Zito line, I think, was that, and regular people, regular Americans, took him seriously, but not literally. Mm-hmm. In other words, a lot of the outrageous things that he would say, they took to be entertaining, but they really didn't. They weren't shocked and appalled the way the professional media class was. Mm-hmm. So, why did he resonate? I mean, partly because he was talking about issues that actually affected them, and so. On immigration, for example, he made a point, and it was controversial. If you remember his first speech when he came down the escalator in 2015, he talked about. I don't have the entire quote in front of me. I wish I did, but the line that the press took and ran with and tried to cudgel him with and have never let go of was the line that. Mexico is not sending their best people. They're all rapists and so on and so forth. Right. In the context, though, he didn't say all Mexicans were rapists. That's not what he said. What he said, though, was that people who are crossing into the country illegally, some of them are coming for work. He actually said some of them are coming from work, some of them are coming to do bad stuff, and some of them, I assume, are good people. Right? Some because they want to make their lives better, and they've got families back at home and so forth. But his greater point there was that, be that as it may, the government of the United States, the duty of the government of the United States, first and foremost, is to take care of its people and put their interests first. And so, when he talked about crime and illegal immigration, we can talk about statistics, but his point was when you have a woman who was shot and killed on a pier in San Francisco by an illegal alien who had been deported a number of times and had an enormous rap sheet, guy shouldn't have been here. That's what really he was talking about. And, it added insult to injury that the guy was acquitted by a jury in San Francisco. That kind of thing resonates with Americans because they feel like, oh, this is somebody who actually understands that, I want to be free, but I also want to be safe. I don't want to be, I don't want to have to worry about crime. Trade was another big one. There's a tendency in Republican circles and in libertarian circles where our default is free trade, and there's a lot of good reasons to be in favor of free trade. What we have is not free trade. We have trade agreements that are called free trade agreements that are 1,000 pages long, that have caveats and exceptions, and they're not free trade agreements. And ultimately they're any sort of trade agreement, free or otherwise, should redound to the benefit of the country that's signing it. And so when Americans are finding that their manufacturing jobs are going away, and they're left with towns that are kind of economically shell shocked, maybe there should be a change there too. And so that was a big issue that resonated for people in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and
Michigan.
Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And so certainly that made a big deal. And finally, I think people were just tired of over a decade of wars without end.
Yeah.
And Trump was the first among Republicans to really say, hey, and which is an old Republican position, by the way. I mean, it wasn't really until the past 30 years or so, 30 or 40 years, that Republicans have been much more interventionist, and Trump was really speaking in an old Republican way, in that sense. And so I think all of that really resonated with Americans, and continues to resonate with Americans, even when it looks like it's chaos, and it often is. Those are things that nevertheless this president has talked about, and in some ways succeeded, in other ways not. He's still got, he hasn't quite been able to get the wall built, but in a lot of respects, he's done real well. I mean,
well, I think this goes to the name of your organization, the Center for American Greatness, and your website, American Greatness, is that, well, Donald Trump's slogan, maybe the greatest political slogan, perhaps of all time. I mean, it's up there with Tippecanoe and Tyler too, right?
Make America great again.
Make America great again. And I think after 8 years of Barack Obama, a president and a ruling class that went out of their way to apologize for America, to diminish America on the world stage, to cede our opinions and our authority to global entities like the United Nations and the EU and others. And I think that's a big part of it. And Ben, you and I, as mentioned before, we've known each other for a long time. We've socialized a lot when we lived in California. I mean, you're a scholar, or at least you fake it pretty well. But you have 11,000 books in your personal library. In fact, I took you for a tour in Heartland's library with 20,000 books. So here's an individual man, ladies and gentlemen, who has half the books of an entire organization like the Heartland Institute.
You've got an awesome library, though.
Well, appreciate that. And we have in this library lots of books about the greatness of America. What separates America and free market capitalism from the other systems of the world in history that have tried and have organized humans very poorly in comparison. But you and I will never forget, actually, it was a July 4th celebration at my house in Southern California. Yeah. And you had brought with you, we had some friends there, not just you and me and a couple other people. We had other friends. And you brought with you the Declaration of Independence and other patriotic readings that you thought that Independence Day, not July 4th, Independence Day needs to be celebrated as James Madison and Thomas Jefferson intended. And that includes remembering the greatness of America and the American experiment. And I would leave those gatherings with you, Ben, very heartened about America. But then the months would pass, and life would go on, and it seems as if, sometimes it seems as if the American experiment is maybe, if not failing, at least not going along as well as it should. Do you think that the future of liberty in America, the greatness of America that the founders intended us to enjoy and to pass on to future generations, is it more peril now than at any time you think in the last 100 years? Sometimes I think it is.
Yes, I do. I like to. I've stolen a line from the late great historian John Lukács, who said at a lecture I once attended of his, thousands of years of Central European pessimism flows through my veins. I'm kind of got a Slavic ethnic background, and so I kind of like that line. I'm somewhat pessimistic because if you look at sort of the national landscape and then you look at what's going on in places. If you look at what's going on in certain universities, for example, if you look at surveys, my background working for the Heartland Institute, I was in education policy, right? And I'm taking a keen interest in civic education, which we just do not do very well in this country anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And we have raised a generation or two of Americans who know very little about the history of their country, know very little about the institutions of their country, or what they do know, they look on with contempt or disfavor. They see the way this country, have been taught that this country was founded by slavers, and that there's no nuance, there's no understanding of the compromises that were necessary to make this place a land of liberty, and it's all or nothing. And it's a disquieting, dispiriting thing, because if you have a whole cohort, a whole generation of Americans coming up to believe that their country isn't worth defending, then how long can the republic last, and how long can freedom last? Not very long. And so, you can take heart in the way, elections. We're having elections all the time. I don't like to get caught up in horse races and trying to divine the meaning of what it means that Virginia just went blue, but a whole bunch of local council races in Western Pennsylvania went red. I mean, a lot of that, some of that matters, but a lot more of it is the culture. Culture matters a lot more in some ways than politics does, and if the culture is sick, that's a much bigger problem, and that's a harder thing to solve, and that's certainly not something that gets solved in a 4 or 8 year presidential administration.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's pretty pessimistic, but I think it's accurate. Many people think that we are in the early stages of a cold civil war right here in our country. In fact, a battleground poll just a couple weeks ago found that 67% of Americans think America is on the edge of a civil war. Quote, the majority of Americans believe that we are 2/3 on the way of being on the edge of a civil war. Now, Ben Boychuk, you live in California still, which I fled from, and I consider unlivable. So if anybody that we've had on this podcast should know better that if we're in a cold civil war right now, it might be you. Are we?
I tend to think that we are cold, as opposed to, nobody's really, well, I mean, some shots have been fired, but it isn't widespread. I mean, we can't.
There is violence in the streets.
Yeah,
Antifa cracking the heads of going to Trump
Yeah.
rallies and beating people up.
And don't forget the guy who shot and nearly killed Steve Scalise,
and he intended to kill all of them.
Yeah, and so there's real dangers here, and California is the state of resistance, and the elected leaders there are proudly so. They ran for office saying that they would, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is very proud that he gets to stand up to Trump. And, the state has been leading other states in filing lawsuits to block the wall, to block certain other changes. There's a big fight over air quality rules. There's some serious fights. And, California also really accounted for the margin of Trump's loss of the popular vote.
Right.
So,
in fact, this is a statistic I like to bring up every time this topic comes up, and I must say it here for you and for the benefit of our listeners. The entirety of the 3 million popular vote came from 3 places: Los Angeles County, San Francisco County, and the 5 boroughs of New York.
Mm-hmm.
If you took those, that was the margin of 3 million.
Yeah.
And so, thank God, the founding fathers, the framers of our Constitution, instituted the Electoral College, so that 3 inner cities do not select for a continent-wide country of 330 million people who their president is.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to be ruled by the people of California. Having lived there all of my life, and and I remain there for the moment. But I do think it. And by the way, anyone listening to this who is interested in, if you think that the term Cold Civil War is rhetorical hyperbole, I would urge you to go to American Greatness, www.amgreatness.com, and search for the writings of Angelo Codevilla. And Angelo has written about that. He's also he wrote a long essay on the Cold Civil War for the Claremont Review of Books before 2016. I think that was published in 2015.
Yeah.
But he's written a lot more about it. He's developed the theme for us.
Yes,
and
the Heartland Institute gave Angelo Codevilla our Heartland Liberty Prize a few years back, and he spoke about that very topic.
yeah, Angelo's great. Angelo is a national treasure, and he's also a pessimistic, an Italian immigrant. I mean, he came from Italy as a kid in the 1940s, and is a proud American, but also deeply read in classical and medieval political philosophy, and so, he's not super keen on the direction things are going. And Angelo, and part of what is driving this so-called Cold Civil War is the division between what Angelo has called the ruling class and the country class. And the ruling class is bipartisan. It consists of Republicans and Democrats, although he says that Republicans are the junior partners in the ruling class, that they tend to defer to the Democrats in the ruling class. And these are people these are your not just your elected politicians, but your businessmen, your CEOs, your woke corporations, your academics, celebrities, and so there's a stark divide between those people who are very powerful, who have most of the megaphones, not all of them, but most of them, and everybody else. People who live in Lake County, Illinois, people who live in the sort of redder, smoggier parts of California or Washington State or Oregon, as opposed to the coastal parts, which are solidly cerulean blue and blissfully. I mean, it's incredible, and if you really think about it, California's been a one-party state for.
Well, since Pete, I mean, let's not count Schwarzenegger, but since Pete Wilson's time, or
practically
Dick Majan, maybe.
There was a moment in the early '90s where Republicans had a majority in the state legislature, or at least the assembly, and then since really the early 2000s, it's just been a rearguard action to stave off Democrats from having a supermajority, because once they got a supermajority, then they can pass tax increases with impunity. Well, now they've got a supermajority, but you look at the landscape of that place. Almost every indicator, incredibly wealthy, but also poverty in parts of that place, parts of that state, especially in the central part of the state, rivaling Mississippi. I mean, it's horrible. And a crumbling in water infrastructure. They're doing some work on the roads, but they've got decades-long backlog on the roads. Airports that are. I mean, LAX is probably one of the, if not the worst, maybe rivaling LaGuardia airport in the country. It's just awful in many respects, weather notwithstanding. The regulatory climate is terrible. Manufacturers are there was a great big dip in manufacturing, and then now it's just kind of slowly bleeding out the rest of the way. There are no really large manufacturers in California anymore. It's Silicon Valley doesn't really make anything. I mean, it generates a lot of intellectual property, which is something, right? But their manufacturing is overseas, and what you get in a state like that is, you have a concentration of incredible wealth, a lot of poverty, a homelessness crisis that is disgraceful. I mean, go to San Francisco, go to Los Angeles,
Yeah.
see it for yourself.
Yeah. I
And-
was just in San Francisco.
Yeah,
It's a
I
mess.
was there in June.
Yeah.
I saw 2 drug deals in broad daylight, one across the street from Union Square, where a cop was standing.
Right.
And
Well, this is something Victor Davis Hanson, who writes for American Greatness,
Right.
mentions all the time. And he lives in California, of course. He lives in the Central Valley and at his vineyard, and he says California is creating basically a modern feudal society.
right.
And you have to wonder: is this on purpose, or is this just? I mean, there's two things, and we're running out of time here,
Right.
and there's so much I want to talk to you about,
know.
and we don't have the time for it. We'll have to have you on again to talk about it. But let's just close with back to the theme of, the divided states of America, that we are maybe in the early stages of a cold civil war where people are separating themselves. People are fleeing California,
Right.
Ben. I fled almost 10 years ago. You're looking east or north, and you're trying to get out. The good news is that California, which is turning itself into a third world country with rolling blackouts and human feces on the streets and an extremely wealthy billionaire elite, and then everybody else, with the great majority of them being in poverty, that in the United States today, you can still escape to go somewhere else, and people are fleeing California. So what is the future of California? Can California continue down the road it is going and continue to be part of a United States that has the same goals and direction forward?
Well, wasn't it? Who was it that said? I'm blanking on The Economist.
Soul?
No, Stein. It was Ben Stein's dad.
Oh, okay.
Who said, if a thing can't keep going, it won't.
Right.
I'm butchering the quote, but the idea, of course, being at some point, all of these things that are besetting California, that that we didn't even talk about, unfunded pension liabilities. All of that stuff is going to come crashing down because it just can't go on, and so. I don't see how California can endure if its children are forced to leave the state to find other better opportunities. If you can't afford to buy a house, if you can't afford rent, I mean, there's a lot of space in California. You could build affordable housing in California without subsidies. You could do it if you would. Deregulate. It's a huge racket, state, local. It's a huge racket. It's an artificially created crisis that could be remedied by the market if they would allow it, which they won't. And so what happens? Well, I mean, there's a huge cry for rent control. Well, rent control doesn't work. And so what's going to happen? My kids are going to leave the state. I've got 2 kids. They're going to leave because they're not going to be able to afford to live or work there. And that's the issue. And so it may very well be the case that maybe California, a state of 35 million people, maybe it becomes 25 million people. And then who knows how that goes. But if you have a middle class that is fleeing the state, I don't know where you're going to get. I don't know if they seem to think that Silicon Valley can pay for everything. Well, maybe not forever. Maybe those guys will get fed up too.
Yeah, maybe.
So that's on that happy note.
Yeah, on that happy note. I always try to end on a positive note, and it's impossible when you're talking about California, and it's really impossible talking to Ben Boychuk, one of the greatest curmudgeons in my life. You have 10 seconds, though, Ben, before we close. What is the most important book that you've read in the last year that you would recommend to our listeners? You have 10 seconds.
Oh, God. That's easy. Martin Gurry's The Revolt of the Public and the Crisis of Authority in the New Millennium. And Gurry he's a retired CIA analyst, and he called Trump before almost anybody. And the book really explains the rise of populism, not just in the United States, but across the world. And it's brilliant.
All right. Ben Boychuk from the Center on American Greatness, from the American Greatness website, the managing editor thereof. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thanks again, Jim.
So it was great to have Ben Boychuk on the podcast, on the In the Tank podcast today. And so here comes what I had promised earlier, and that is the interview with Jason Isaac of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and talking about his project called Life Powered. And this was broadcast live from SPN just last week. We are recording this podcast live from SPN's national meeting at snowy and cold Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Very cold.
Well, it's supposed to be this cold, but it's adventurous out there, and there's a lot of outdoor walking you have to do. And even though I'm from Chicago, I'm a big baby, and I'm going to complain about it to everybody, but perhaps only once on this podcast. But what's great about SPN is that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of people here from state policy think tanks from across the country. The Heartland Institute, as a matter of fact, our founding president, Joe Bast, had I think it was called the Madison Group, got together some 30 years ago that became SPN.
That's right.
So, while the Heartland Institute is a national think tank, we do deal with state policy. And so it's always a lot of fun to run into our friends and allies in the state policy and state think tank world, because as they concentrate on their states, we try to come in there and help them as we can, fly in like paratroopers and then leave and then go to another state, help somebody else out. I think it's a great organization, and it's great for the Heartland Institute to be part of SPN, even though we don't concentrate on one state. And so a state policy think tank person I have with me right now as a guest, as we're recording this in the communal hall here at SPN, is Jason Isaac. He is from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He's Senior Manager and Distinguished Fellow of a project called Life Powered at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He's also a former state legislator who represented the wonderful Hill Country.
That's right.
Of Texas.
And don't hold that against me.
Yeah, we'll try not to.
I've come over to the smart side.
There you go. You're doing God's work
That's
now.
Right, I am. If I'd only known what I know now, what I knew, if I'd only known then what I know now,
yes.
There'd be a lot of different votes.
Well, Jason, you were the breakfast speaker this morning at every SPN for the last several now. The Thomas Jefferson Institute, which I believe is based in Virginia, which makes sense.
Yes, it does.
They put on an energy policy summit, a kind of invitation only, to kind of a pre-SPN event that Heartland goes to, since we do a lot of energy policy. And of course, Texas Public Policy Foundation does a lot of energy policy work as well. And you had a fantastic presentation this morning at breakfast, and I wanted to talk to you about that, to kind of expand on it, to get our listeners, since that was invitation only.
Sure.
I think they should have been privy to some of the things you talked about today. So why don't we just start out, why don't you tell us just a little bit about what the Life Powered project at TPPF is? How long has it been around? I know that I've seen some things from you guys for several years now.
Sure, yeah, the Life Powered project at TPPF, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, has been around for a few years now. We were originally branded as Fueling Freedom in an effort to educate people about the Clean Power Plan and how bad that would be for America and Americans in general, in leading to higher cost of electricity and less affordable, reliable electricity. Reliable being a key word, as people in California are experiencing what it means to not have reliable electricity. And then about a year and a half ago, we rebranded as Life Powered. We really feel like we won the fight on the Clean Power Plan, which was a great thing for all of America.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
And so the Life Powered brand was created to kind of do some focus testing to find out what works with people, and that was the name that was chosen right before I started. And it's really, their short mission statement is to raise America's energy IQ. And based on some of the polling that I've seen, that people think CO2 is poisonous to plants, and that we can go 100% renewable without any fossil fuels whatsoever, it means that we've got a long way to go and raise America's energy IQ.
Yeah.
And so I had an opportunity to present this morning, like you said, the Thomas Jefferson Institute Energy Breakfast. It was the Energy 101 session, which we've just launched a new video series called Energy 101 that kind of shows people where electricity comes from, how it's generated, how the grid works, and how an interconnected grid is really the best kind of grid to have. And we've got a great one in Texas, and there are others around the United States. And so we launched this new video series both in English and in Spanish. I played that this morning. And then talked some of my experiences talking to younger generations about the things that we enjoy in our lives and where they come from.
Right.
And ironically enough, they come from fossil fuels.
Right.
Over 80% of the products that we use on a daily basis wouldn't be possible without fossil fuels. Solar panels wouldn't be possible without fossil fuels. At Life Powered, we're about all the above. We don't like subsidies. We don't like picking winners and losers. We want affordable, reliable energy.
Right. And we also want prosperity for all. And we want to lift people out of poverty. poverty.
Yeah, and we've got a great video series about energy poverty equals poverty.
Exactly.
And it's just a phenomenal story about people around the world. You've got over 1.3 billion people in the world that have no access to electricity. You've got another billion that have limited access, meaning they can go to a convenience store, maybe charge their phone for a little bit, but they don't have it at home. And those 1.3 billion people have no access to clean running water. We've got to pull those people out of poverty. And in the last 10 years, because of affordable, reliable energy, we're getting more of those people access to energy and lifting over half of the people that were in extreme poverty have now come out in the last 10 years. That's an incredible improvement for mankind. Apple actually did a news story that showed who would win the 10-year Facebook challenge, and it would be mankind, and they cited that statistic alone and reducing the extreme poverty population by greater than 50%, by increasing life expectancy, by reducing childhood mortality. And those are all good stories. The stories that most people don't know, though, unfortunately, they think that we're getting more people in poverty, that we're not living as long, we're not living as healthy lives. I talked a little bit about this morning. I try to poll audiences before I speak to them and ask them about our environmental quality. And, one of my favorites is, how many polar bears do you think we have? And I show two numbers on the board, and it's 9,000 or 25,000. And invariably, at minimum, 70% think we have 9,000. I've had some audiences 100% swear that we only have 9,000 polar bears. And I'm said, actually in 1970 we had 9,000 polar bears. Today we have over 25,000, and just 2 weeks ago saw some data that shows we have over 40,000 polar bears. I don't know why that's become the barometric measurement of climate, but if it is, we're doing amazing in this world by increasing the population of polar bears.
We might have a polar bear crisis on our hands. There might be too many.
There could be too many. I don't ever want to be alone with one. I don't care how cute and cuddly they look. I don't want to be near one.
Yeah, well, they are the mascot they've become one of the mascots of the global warming alarmist movement, and it's Save the Polar Bears. It was Save the Whales back in the 80s, and now it's Save the Polar Bears.
Yeah, it's great. Chris Wright, who's a good friend of Life Powered, who's speaking at SPN, has talked. He said he printed a T-shirt, top 10 things I love about oil and gas, and the number one was we saved the whales.
No.
And you really think about it, what were whales being hunted for?
Right.
It was for the oil. To light lamps so people could have lights in their homes, but now you don't need to do that because we've got produced oil from the ground, which is phenomenal.
Right. Yeah, and we did that before we had the electrification of the country.
Yes.
So we used the petroleum, the kerosene, and Standard Oil. They refined these products, and they were used all across the world instead of whales.
And human flourishing began.
Human flourishing began. What do you know?
That's
Energy
incredible.
And human flourishing seem to be pretty tightly.
They are very tied tightly, and economic prosperity and environmental leadership are tied very tightly. As you get countries more access to GDP, as their economies grow, that's when they really start caring about the environment, as we've proven here in the United States. I think I've read some numbers that say if you get the GDP above $5,000 a person annually, which to me is just appalling to only make $5,000 a year, although I tried that in the legislature for a few years. It's really tough, but that's when people start to care about the environment. And we've seen that here in the United States. We're a world leader in environmental protections. I talk to kids about, how's our air quality? Invariably, anywhere from 70 to 100% believe that our air quality is worse today than it was 10 years ago. And I show them the statistics. And one kid questioned me. One kid's like, where'd you get that data? And I'm like, thank you for asking. That's so important that you are a critical thinker, that you ask where the numbers come from. Good job. And I said, the World Health Organization. That's where we get the data. We're not making these numbers up. And I said, by the way, we've got the strictest air quality standards in the world, and we're the only ones that meet them. And this kid's like, oh, that's pretty good. They start to stand up a little bit. Their chest gets to bow out a little bit. Their shoulders roll back. They're getting confident. They're starting to believe in our country and have pride in our country because we are a world leader in environmental protection. And I show them the data of all the pollutants, the actual pollutants that cause harm to man, we've reduced. And someone's like, what about CO2? And I'm like, put down the Topo Chico, put down the LaCroix. Let's talk about CO2. You're actually drinking it and it's not killing you. And they're like, wait, what? Sparkling water, what do you think that is? I said, but if you're concerned about CO2, personally, I'm not.
Nope.
We've reduced it 9% since 2008, while the rest of the world's increased it 17%.
These are facts. It actually reminds me. I was struck, Jason Isaac. What's important about what the Texas Public Policy Foundation and Life Powered Project is about is how great you guys are at communicating these facts to people. It's amazing the amount of ignorance that is prevalent among especially millennials and kids. I mean, my own, I don't have any kids of my own, but I have two nephews. One just started college. The other one is in high school still. And I hope that when they're released into college, where I won't have as much control over them, they at least have enough knowledge to question what they may be taught in their schools. And so I was really struck today, Jason, when you talked about there are two audiences that are vital to capture, or at least educate. And there's so much work to be done on educating the public about the reality, the truth about our energy economy, about the level of pollution, quote unquote pollution, that is actually emitted in a modern energy economy like we have in the United States. And the two audiences that we really need to reach out to are women and millennials. And I was reminded of that because as I want you to recount your story of talking to millennials in perhaps high schools and other gatherings of young people, because it reminded me of the times I've done that. I've spoken to AP science classes a few times over the years, invited by a professor or by a teacher who didn't agree with us, but had heard about our materials and wanted to at least expose for a period the quote-unquote other side of what's happening to the environment. And I, as you were talking about your experience, I was amazed. I came with charts that we have from scientists that Heartland works with. These are renowned professors. They're using data from NOAA and NASA, and from raw data from satellite and from satellite measurements. And I would show them to them. I say, so look, here's a line where the United States IPCC said we were going to be. Mm-hmm. What's great about computer modeling is that it started back in the late 90s, and now we have some time. We have about 20 years to look at these things, right? And so here's the lines where they said we're going to be.
Well,
and here's the actual measurements. And the kids started getting kind of angry at me.
Yeah.
And I don't know why this is upsetting you so much. This is just the data. This is the data that you should trust. This is from your government. And so you've been lied to. And so one of the things that you said today is that when a millennial has learned that he's been lied to, that's when you really start to land your message.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your experience in that regard.
No, you're absolutely right. We need to appeal to millennials with our messaging. We need to appeal to women. And both of those subsets, when they find out they've been lied to, will not believe the source any longer. And I'm not about trying to change minds. I'm trying to challenge critical thinking. I want to share some different facts with them, maybe some actual facts with them, and not emotion, not fear. I'm not trying to scare people into doing things. I'm trying to motivate people to be proud of our leadership. And then I want to challenge them. I talk about the internal combustion engine is only about 40 to 50% efficient, but a power cell is 80% efficient. But power cells are 6 times more expensive, and so I want to challenge the kids. You need to go and please solve the problems to make internal combustion engines more efficient, make power cells more affordable. But so back to being lied to is when you do truly share the data with them, that our policies, both at the United Nations and IMF, that are denying financial dollars available to developing countries if they're investing in fossil fuels, is actually keeping people in poverty. And that's the number one mover of those two segments. Millennials and women will care if you can make the connection that energy poverty equals poverty.
Right.
And if you truly want to lift the world out of poverty, get them access to energy, affordable, reliable electricity. You look at people here in the United States, and it's not uncommon. People, about half the population below the poverty level in certain cities are paying almost a third of their income just on their household utilities. That's energy, could be electricity and natural gas if they have natural gas at home. A third of their income, when affordable is at 5%. So 30% are the least among us in the United States. If we could get them more affordable, reliable electricity, they're going to have more money, just like people around the world, to invest in their careers, invest in their education, maybe stop women from having to spend over 200 million hours a day walking to collect water. That's how much time women spend around the world walking to collect water, over 200 million hours. Imagine if you could free up half that time, how much more productive women would be. They'd start jobs, they'd grow their families, they'd start careers. That's how you empower women around the world, is get them access to energy. It's over 3 miles a day that they're spending walking to collect water.
Yeah.
I was doing an interview with someone from Congressman Crenshaw's office, Hannah, one of his staffers who's done mission work in Ethiopia. And she says, you know what technology they do have access to in Ethiopia? And I said, no, what's that? And she goes, the women have access to implantable birth control, because they know at some point on their journeys to collect water, they're going to be raped or sexually assaulted. And to me, that's heartbreaking to know that there are international policies that are denying those women access to energy. But if they're investing in wind and solar, which is not reliable, they can get money, they can borrow money. It's just really unfortunate, some of the policies that you see around the world. But that policy of connecting poverty and energy poverty is a huge mover of people in the United States, both female and millennials in general.
Yeah, I mean, to their credit, young people today, are maybe than our generation. I think we're both Generation X. At least you look young enough to be Generation X, for sure. I'd maybe not, according to some people. But they really do care about making a difference. They care about, polls after poll shows that the millennial generation and Generation Z really care about, quote unquote, making a difference and making a difference in the world and doing good to the world and helping people that need help. And so when you equate energy poverty with poverty, I don't think they're getting that in school necessarily from their instructors, unless you have a very extraordinary teacher in your high school to tell you these things.
That's right.
Because they do only get one side of the story. One thing that always frustrates me, talking with younger people, is that they seem to think that renewable energy is free. That, well, it's solar energy. I mean, it's the sun. The sun's free. The wind just blows. It's free. Look, we can just take it. Free energy from the wind and the solar. They have no concept of where the materials come from to create solar cells. They have no idea that, you talk about caring about somebody, making a difference for the poor of the world. Cobalt has to be mined, and most of it comes from extremely impoverished people, children in the Congo and in Africa.
Yeah,
and so to make these batteries, right?
Yep, UNICEF says there's over 40,000 children in the Congo aged 13 and younger, many as young as 4 years old, that are mining cobalt because we heavily subsidize electric vehicles and technology here in the United States.
Right.
And I've joked with members of Congress, I talked about the Chinese and all the technology they steal from us. It'd be nice if they'd utilize the pollution control technology, because we actually export jobs to China and then we import their pollution. As far west as to where we are right now in Colorado, that pollution blows over the Pacific, over California, into California. 65% of the pollution in California, the air pollution, comes from Asia. As far west as Denver and Houston is polluting our cities because they don't utilize the pollution control technology that we do. And then you talk about the rare earth elements that are used to build wind, solar, and the batteries and the computers that we enjoy. It's not mined here in the United States. 80 to 95% of it comes from China alone. And for every ton of rare earth elements that you extract, that you mine, you create 1 ton of radioactive waste. An equal amount. That's from Dr. Ken Morgan, former Energy Institute leader at Texas Christian University. I've worked with him in the past, and he would say that, and it was just mind-boggling to me as someone who had served in a legislative body dealing with low-level radioactive waste in Andrews County, Texas, and trying to expand that to create a little bit higher level of people would go crazy. But here we are creating high-level radioactive waste in China. We're just moving our pollution footprint somewhere else, and we're heavily subsidizing it in the United States.
Yeah, and it's unseen. And so if you don't see it, you don't think about it. And if it's not for Life Powered Project at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, nobody would know about this stuff.
No.
You guys are so great at communicating these things. And so you talk about, you've actually mentioned several things that are like wow moments. They should be wow moments to people who are not informed on these things. And you have to educate a layman audience. They have what Joe Bast, our founder at the Heartland, used to call rational ignorance. It's like, there's no need for me to know this information. I have to fill my brain with other things.
Absolutely.
And so I'm rationally ignorant of X facts,
Yes.
But you and I, we're in the policy game, so we are rationally informed about these things. So what are some of the wow moments that stick out to you as you communicate or see the communications of the Life Powered project go out into the world? What are some of those wow moments that you really think, wow, I'm really glad that I chose to share that fact?
Well, when you talk about affordable electricity and people in Texas, we've done a lot of polling across the country, and by and large, people think that the climate is in a crisis, that the changing climate is a crisis, that we've got to do something about it. When I share with them NOAA data that shows that over 90% of their temperature reading devices, the 1,221 that they have in the United States, are within 100 feet of urban heat islands or vent hoods from restaurants that don't meet their own standards, and when I share that information, that's a wow moment. And when I tell them that in 2005 they put out 114 new measuring devices, and those are showing no average increase in temperature in the United States, the continental United States, that's a wow moment. People are like, wait, I've been lied to? And that's why the polling shows that there's a crisis But wait, when you really look at the data, is there a crisis? What we are seeing is that people are more resilient. Lives, people lost due to severe weather incidences are now, we're seeing 8 or 9%, almost 99% reduction in deaths from severe weather incidences in the United States over the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Because we have noticed, people are like, oh, that's because you have satellites. How'd that satellite get up there? What's that satellite made of? You're like, oh, well, yeah, so you want to return us to where we don't have satellites.
Yeah, we didn't blow it up there with the wind, did
Yeah,
we?
yeah, it didn't get up there on its own. We put it up there. American innovation, in most cases, put those up there so we can get notified. We can get alerts and warnings and get out of the way thanks to access to hydrocarbons.
Right.
Fossil fuels. So those are some wow moments that I've seen. The air quality one is always a big one. When I talk about how we've improved air quality, we've reduced the criteria pollutants, the 6 harmful pollutants, 74%. That's like, wow, we have? And oh, by the way, we're a world leader in that? Why are we doing all these policies? Why aren't we forcing our trading partners to meet our air quality standards? Like, good question. That's what we should be doing.
That's right. That's
We
right.
shouldn't be exporting jobs and importing pollution. We should be manufacturing those products right here in the United States where we have better pollution control technology. We should be mining, because there are rare earth elements here in the United States. We should be mining them here because we'll dispose of the radioactive waste. So it'd be great if we had 100% of our solar and wind mined and built right here in the United States.
Right.
Better pollution control for the world. It'd be better for the entire world if we did that.
And I don't think 13-year-old kids would be digging it out of the ground either.
I don't think so.
Not in this country.
No, not here in the United States.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the things, there were several different parts of our energy summit today with the Thomas Jefferson Institute.
Yes.
That you were in, and I love talking energy. I'm a nerd on that. I think it's really interesting, but it's really this battle between, fossil fuels obviously has a bad reputation. It's been given a bad reputation by the media. We had one of the workshops that we were both in the room today talked about how the media doesn't report like the facts about renewable energy and how it's more expensive, on how it takes rare earth minerals, how every solar plant and every solar field and wind farm is backed up by usually a natural gas power plant, because you have to keep contributing to the grid even when the sun goes down and the wind doesn't blow, and people need that energy all the time. But these are things that people don't know and the media doesn't know. And I'm a communications director at Heartland Institute. I was 16 years in the media. I call myself a recovering journalist, and it's really embarrassing. I really don't feel proud of that anymore. But it's not that the media doesn't know. I think they know, and they won't report it because it doesn't fit an agenda that they want to push. And it's the agenda that the Texas Public Policy Foundation and the Heartland Institute and a lot of the other organizations here at SPN are trying to fight back on it. And it's really hard because it's not that they don't know, it's that they are hiding it, I think, from the American people, which is why it's so important that the Life Powered project is so important.
Yeah, it's you talk about land use, so you've got hypothetically, I'm just using numbers to make them more round, but 100 acres for a natural gas power plant or 100 acres for a coal-fired power plant. To do solar equivalent, you'd need 27 times that. So you'd need 2,700 acres of land for solar panels. You'd need 1,000 acres of land for wind. The density is just not there. So that's why people in Maryland have said, I don't want to see windmills off the coast. That's why, and people are getting up in arms. That's when the media is going to report about it, because they say, oh, we've got some people that are ticked off here. We can start selling a sensational story, and then we'll go back and be like, well, why do policymakers give incentives for wind and solar when they're damaging the ecosystem, when they're making thousands of acres useless? And, oh, by the way, when they're done, they're just going to sit out there and rot and return to the soil? I don't think so.
No.
It's going to be more of a polluted nightmare than we would had we gone with a small energy dense natural gas or coal-fired electricity like we have generally done in the United States.
Well, what we found is with the dismantling of as the wind power is maturing, I guess, because it's been subsidized for so long, so we got to the point where we have to dismantle some of these wind turbines, and those blades, no landfills will take them.
None. And the ones that do, accidentally, they take up their entire landfill space.
Yeah.
Because they're only permitted to hold so much.
Right.
You put a few blades in there, you're out of space.
Yeah. And people need to know that there are consequences to every action. It's just logic. And people, it's the costs of, it's really kind of frustrating. The real costs in dead birds, in water use, in land use. which would disrupt animal migrations in many, many ways, is never talked about. But those are the costs. Everything has a cost. Those keep increasing as we ramp up wind and solar. And meanwhile, the fossil fuel costs, yes, of course they have costs, but we have spent the last 100 years mitigating those costs and shrinking them down to they're so small that, like you said in your presentation this morning, Jason, was that our air and water is so much more cleaner than it was for our parents, not to mention our grandparents. We are living in a golden age of air and water and land cleanliness, not counting the stuff that comes over that blows over the Pacific Ocean. But people don't understand that the cost of fossil fuels, we've spent the time, we've spent the money, we've spent an enormous amount of resources to shorten, to make smaller the environmental costs of fossil fuel use, while we're not even figuring out ways to deal with the very complicated and really not even fully understood costs of quote-unquote renewable energy.
Yeah, renewable. It's not very, very renewable. No, you're right. You're spot on, Jim. When you talk about air quality, you mentioned Pittsburgh. Yeah. You look at the air quality from 1970 to today in Pittsburgh, and it's miraculous. And that just hasn't blown out in the ocean. It's because we've started putting catalytic converters on cars, and we've started to get wiser with our use of our fuels so that we're not wasting fuels. And we really have done a miraculous job here in the United States. And to think that we've got some products that are in their infancy and heavily subsidized that are causing huge environmental footprint and impacts is frightening. And I had a high school student ask me, said, well, I'm really concerned about the environmental impact of energy production. And I said, me too, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I mentioned the footprint, the necessity of wind is 100 times. You need 100 times more land than you would for coal or natural gas. Wind or solar is 27 times the land mass required. And I don't think that's what the kid was talking about when he said he was concerned about the environmental impact. But when I told him this, I said, don't you like having land available and resources available? And he says, yeah. And I said, one other thing is this stuff with endangered species and how wind gets credit for killing endangered species, and they're not charged like the oil and gas industry is. And he was just shocked. I said, they're allowed to kill endangered species.
Yep.
And he was just floored and angry. That's one person that we flipped right there that didn't have all of the information.
Yeah, and those are the kind of stories that the Texas Public Policy Foundation, through the Life Powered program, is telling people. And in fact, I'm going to hold you to this, because you had said near the end of your presentation today, Jason, that, hey, you said, I typed it down. Happy to let us use their videos and put your own branding on
Absolutely.
it. So I'll tell you what
we've done it for other associations and organizations where they're like, hey, we want to play your video at our annual conference. Great. What's your logo? I'll put your logo at the end of it. They were shocked, and they're like, oh, awesome. So yes, we're happy to do that.
Tell you what, we'll share the logos, because I definitely want to give you guys the credit, but
Great.
It's great because we want to push those things out to our audience as well. So so Jason Isaac, where can people find more information about this project from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and watch these fantastic videos and share them with the people in their lives so that they can understand the truth about really the miracle of modern society, which is brought to us by the responsible use of fossil fuels?
Yeah, absolutely. Lifepowered.org is our website. LIFE powered, POWERED.org is our website. Lifepowered.org. Check that out. You'll find links to our Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and it goes right to our YouTube playlist. We've got over 20 videos on there. The Energy 101 video that I showed today is available both English and in Spanish. We're trying to reach people. Our initiative, we want to raise America's energy IQ. I'm kind of growing that to North America, all of North America, some of South America, and then I did an interview with Channel 4 News from the UK just last week. So it'll be interesting to see how they spin how wonderful our energy resources are here in the United States. They were kind of shocked to learn that the number one renewable that they use in the EU, do you know what it is, Jim?
No.
It's wood.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
The number one renewable used in EU is wood, and it's actually wood they purchase from the southeastern United States. That releases more carbon. It's 300% more carbon than natural gas, 150% more carbon than using coal. We should be using trees to build affordable homes, not to burn to produce renewable electricity in the EU, which is just mind-boggling that that's considered renewable.
Wow. Well, the videos from the Life Powered project, that's Life:(Powered) project at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, are fantastic. If you know a lot about energy policy, what you're going to learn from these videos is the best way to communicate what you know to those who don't know.
That's
right. And how it impacts their lives. One of the videos that I really loved was a woman Again, you guys know your audiences, and
Yes.
these are very, very professionally produced. These are very absolute top shelf, and it's just a woman waking up in the morning and going through her life. Before she even gets her cup of coffee, there are 45 different products and things that she
little
has
icons
done,
that pop
icons
up,
that
yeah.
pop up that are brought to you by fossil
Yeah,
fuels.
that shows where they come from: oil,
Yeah.
gas, coal.
That's right.
It's interesting. On the flight into SPN, the annual meeting yesterday, was talking on the plane about the plastic straws ban, and I said I love it when San Francisco bans plastic straws, but they give away 4.5 million plastic syringes and needles every year.
Right. Well, there's our cue. The music is
right.
coming back up for the thing.
Jim, thanks for having me on.
Jason Isaac, thanks for being on the podcast.
And that'll do it for this edition of the In the Tank podcast. I am your substitute host, Jim Lakely, Director of Communications at the Heartland Institute. Again, please do what you can to help spread the word. I think this is a very good podcast. We have very interesting guests. I hope you think so too, and will help spread the word to your friends and leave us a review on iTunes. Talk to you next week.